the Cuban Missile Crisis, and near-nuclear war. In October 1962, the world was on the brink of nuclear war. The US and USSR were locked in an armed standoff over the installation of Soviet nuclear missiles in Cuba. One wrong move, and both superpowers could have launched a nuclear exchange, leading to a global catastrophe. One of the most critical moments occurred when U.S. destroyers dropped warning depth charges on the submarine B-59, which was carrying nuclear torpedoes. The submarine's commander almost gave the order to attack. However, the second captain, Vasily Arkhipov, insisted on discussing the matter with his superiors, and the attack was ultimately not carried out. This decision prevented an almost inevitable nuclear war. The nearly failed Apollo 11 mission. Apollo 11 was a historic mission that put humans on the moon for the first time. But there was a moment when this monumental achievement was in danger of failing, and the astronauts almost never returned to Earth. During the landing on the moon, the lander almost ran out of fuel. Neil Armstrong was able to land the module manually, using the remaining fuel vapor within a split second. It was a critical decision that literally saved the mission within seconds and allowed the first steps on the moon. SARS-CoV, almost a pandemic, 2003. In 2003, the SARS outbreak could have become a pandemic similar to COVID-19. The SARS-CoV virus spread rapidly from China and threatened to become a global epidemic. The SARS virus was highly contagious and could have become uncontrollable, but thanks to the rapid response of the WHO and the coordinated work of scientists, it was contained. Isolation, contact tracing, and quarantine measures were put in place. If the actions had been a little slower, the world would have faced a pandemic earlier and perhaps without the ability to react quickly. Chernobyl, another accident on the brink, 1986. The Chernobyl accident was one of the worst nuclear disasters in history, but it could have been worse. After the first explosion, the reactor remained active, and another powerful eruption could have occurred at any moment. After the accident, there was a risk of another explosion. Water from a reservoir under the reactor, mixed with hot fuel, could have caused a thermonuclear explosion. Brave volunteers, Alexei Ananenko, Valery Bespalov, and Boris Baranov, went down into the flooded room and opened valves to release the water. If they had not done so, the radiation release could have made most of Europe uninhabitable. The Earth's near destruction by a meteorite in 2013. In February 2013, a meteorite entered the Earth's atmosphere over the city of Chelyabinsk in Russia. This event was the largest such event since 1908, when the Tunguska meteorite destroyed a forest in Siberia. The Chelyabinsk meteorite weighed about 13,000 tons and created an explosion equal to 20 to 30 Hiroshimas. It exploded in the atmosphere, injuring thousands of people. But its size could have been much larger. There is a possibility that if the angle of entry had been different, the meteorite would not have disintegrated in the atmosphere, but would have reached the surface, which would have led to much more serious consequences. A chance call that saved a life. In 1939, the famous biochemist Sir Alexander Fleming, who discovered penicillin, almost died before he lived to see his discovery. One day, Fleming was supposed to go to an important meeting, but before the trip, he accidentally dialed the wrong number and called his colleague, who was in the lab and discovered a dangerous compound secreted by bacteria. The colleague warned Fleming about the danger, and he changed his plans, avoiding contact with dangerous samples. This incident saved his life, and soon he was able to complete his work on penicillin, which subsequently saved millions of people. Global warming that was almost averted. In the 1970s, scientists and politicians seriously considered the possibility of major measures to prevent global warming. At that time, a link was discovered between carbon dioxide emissions and the rise in temperature on the planet. In 1979, a conference on climate change was held in Geneva, and a number of initiatives were proposed that could significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But world leaders could not agree, and the efforts came to naught. If those measures had been taken, humanity might have a completely different environmental situation today. Britain's near extinction due to blackout. In 2003, Britain almost faced a total energy collapse that could have brought the economy to a standstill and had serious consequences for millions of people. The near blackout was caused by a power outage in London and the south of England. The system was on the verge of total collapse due to overload. Thanks to the intervention of engineers and prompt action, the situation was saved, and a major energy crisis that could have paralyzed the country for a long time was prevented. The near collapse of the South African liberation talks, 1990. The peaceful resolution of the apartheid conflict in South Africa could have ended very differently if the talks had failed in 1990. In 1990, Nelson Mandela and the South African government began talks on a peaceful end to apartheid, but the first rounds were tense and in danger of collapse. There were doubts that a compromise was even possible, and without the efforts of both sides, South Africa could have descended into civil war. The peaceful end to apartheid became an example of a peaceful transition that could have turned into a much bloodier scenario. The near destruction of the Amazon. In the 1980s, deforestation in the Amazon was so rapid and widespread that some experts seriously predicted the complete disappearance of the Amazon rainforest by the 2020s. Governments and environmental groups have joined forces to draw attention to the problem. Thanks to international cooperation, deforestation has been slowed, although the problem has not been completely solved. Without these efforts, the lungs of the planet could be destroyed, which would seriously affect the Earth's climate system.